This is, I think, our sixth remote meeting, and we'll continue to meet in this format. My name is Rhonda Goldfein, and I'm going to go through the roll call. You heard us doing a little bit of it. So Shauna Long is an excused absence. Has Mujib joined us? Mujib Tawdry?
I don't see.
Okay. Ben Geffen?
He is here.
Thank you. George Mosey? There he is. Bilal Qayyum?
Yep, Bilal's right there.
Thank you. Michael Ramming? Okay. Michael Wehrman? And thank you. And we think that Sarah Young has a second pass because she's a new parent.
We can vote on it if you'd like, Rhonda.
She gets a vote on whether she gets a pass?
Just kidding. Get the bet.
Okay. How about I pass it to Hans if you'd be kind enough to introduce your staff?
Oh, absolutely. So I'll start with the order of the screen in no other particular order. Danny, say hello, Danny. Janine Zajac, one of our policy analysts. Say hi. Anthony Arachi, our deputy executive director for the next 4 days. Hello, Sadie. Sadie is our intern from UPenn in a dual degree program, MSW JD. I now see Talia. Talia is one of our policy analysts. Angelica Hendricks is another policy analyst. And missing right now is Anastasia McCarthy, who could not make it.
Okay. Thank you. Do we have a motion to approve the minutes from our September meeting? Okay. Thank you. Do we have a second? Thank you. All in favor of the commissioners?
Thank you.
Thank you. So tonight's meeting is a first, or in some ways kind of a last. As many of you may have heard, and he'll talk about this himself, but tonight is Hans's last meeting as our executive director. Hans has done a tremendous job with the Police Advisory Commission. I think that he has managed that great blend of knowing when to be collegial and participatory and knowing when to push back because that's what justice calls for. And we are grateful for Hans's contribution to the commission and for his contribution to make policing better in Philadelphia. I'm going to leave it to Hans when it's his turn to speak to talk to you about where he's going, but to simply say that we are all grateful for your participation and we are all better for it. Lest you think that the Police Advisory Commission will be left in the lurch, we are happy to say that Anthony Arachi, our deputy director, has been named and approved by the mayor's office as the interim executive director. Anthony's been with the commission for 3.5 years. And before that was with the Attorney General's office, Inspector General, forgive me, the Inspector General's office in Philadelphia for 8 years. So he has a strong investigatory background and that he and the staff will be continuing the work that Hans has done and the progress that he's made in moving the PAC forward. Additionally, by the time we meet in November, an important election will have occurred on the national level, the state, local, and the municipal level. There are a couple of ballot questions, and we can direct you to the Committee of 70 for their analysis of those ballot questions. One of the ballot questions relates to the Police Advisory Commission. An approval of the ballot question relating to the Police Advisory Commission would be additional transparency, permanency, and accountability with the commission, and that it would be directed by City Council instead of the Managing Director's office. And so I want to encourage you, like all of the important questions in this election that's coming up, to familiarize yourself with the candidates, familiarize yourself with the issues, and honor your sacred right to vote and vote for those candidates and those issues that are in alignment with your personal values. So to that end, I want to pass to Hans to share with us, or all of you, his exciting plans for where he goes next.
It's a world domination, Rhonda.
I
know. But yeah, so I definitely will give everybody a quick update, but what I thought would be useful is if I offered another ED update, an abridged one this time, based on what has gone on so far since our last meeting, and then I'm happy to talk about where I'm going. The initial primer there is that I'm not leaving Philadelphia, but since our last meeting, the PAC has continued a lot of its work and a lot of its collaborations. We continue to support the GVI, the Group Violence Intervention Advisory Commission, Advisory Committee, I should say, on its work as it continues to fully form and coalesce around some of the custom notifications and other approaches to group violence in the city. So we're continuing to support that, and I've already connected Anthony to that group to continue our voice on that committee. And almost everything that I have done has either already included Anthony or a staff member, or will include Anthony and a staff member. So I'll stop giving updates about the fact that Anthony's been connected. The PAC had a really, really productive and really positive meeting with the police department regarding our PBI collaboration. We had a lot of things to iron out, as you might imagine, when two organizations try and work together on something. And we had a really positive meeting as a great big step forward in that project. I'm sorry I won't be here to see that be finalized, but I'm really proud that that's something that the organization is engaged in. Both organizations is engaged in, the PAC and the police department. And I look forward to reading about that as a resident of the city. Led mostly by Angelica, the PAC has continued its presence on a collaboration with the police department and several other agencies around the city regarding the PPD's facial recognition policy. We hope to work with them further on that policy and an opportunity to provide, in some way, shape, or form, input into that policy by the public. The PAC delivered the Plainview project presentation, a form of it that you will be seeing this evening, was delivered to the police department. Commissioner Outlaw and her team came to the meeting virtually, of course, and Janine did a fantastic job delivering and condensing what is a 40-page report into a digestible presentation. And so I was really proud to see that. And I think you will all see the brilliance of that type of presentation soon, because Janine will be presenting a public presentation to you all as soon as I'm done blubbering about it. I participated in the LGBTQ bar event about police reform. That was a really great opportunity to speak alongside other leaders in the city who are focused on this issue. I really appreciated that opportunity. In response to a couple of direct complaints that have been coming in, the PAC has done two, one more typical and one more unique response. We did get some complaints on social media, specifically district leadership either blocking or not responding to, or otherwise prohibiting folks from their pages or from their Twitter accounts And to be perfectly honest, I wasn't entirely clear on every situation, whether it was a verified account or a non-verified account or a PPD account, et cetera, what was permitted. And so what we decided to do is to first ask the law department to opine and offer guidance to the police department on when blocking someone was permitted before working on whether or not they should do it, whether or not we recommend that they consider something, even if it is permitted. So that is in process. The law department is working on understanding what detailed guidance they can offer by looking at specific examples where somebody was blocked by a police department employee, typically a police department leadership in some way. And when I say leadership, I mean like lieutenant, captain, or above. So stay tuned for that guidance from the law department. I don't know if they're going to publish it, but they will opine directly to the police department for sure. Finally, the PAC, many folks have contacted the PAC regarding the police department's response to homicide chief Fauci. That was a response that many of you read about in the paper, but there was also an accompanying complaint against police, which we have requested to monitor. We will do so and hopefully be able to opine at some point in the future. Again, I regret that I won't be involved in that. So finally, the reason I won't be involved in that is because I, about 2 weeks ago, did notify the city and other folks on the board that I will be leaving the city this Friday. Again, only as an employee, I will still be a resident. And I will be going to the Center for Policing Equity. The Center for Policing Equity focuses on police reform as well, just in a different way and on a national scale. So it's very similar work. And I will be joining them as a vice president of law enforcement initiatives, which I'm looking forward to doing. And hopefully the paths of many of the people here on the board, in the police department, and mine will cross again in the future. But it's been a real absolute pleasure to serve in this role for the last 3 years. And I thank everyone for giving me the opportunity to serve the city and the people of the city of Philadelphia. It wasn't always the warmest welcome, but it was definitely an amazing time, and I really appreciated just the response the PAC got and support the PAC got from many of the folks here on this call. So thank you very much. I do want to introduce Janine. Janine Zajac is our policy analyst. Just a quick primer here. Plainview project happened in 2019, in June or so. Somewhere between June and July, Janine kind of said, you know, I think I want to lead us on this. I think I want to take this project. And so, you know, that is right there is where the phrase glutton for punishment was probably never used more appropriately. But she never stopped. You know, once she decided it was a project that she wanted to take, she really owned it and continued to, through a lot of challenges that she's going to outline, push forward and really make sure that she delivered a work product that is just top notch. And I can't thank her enough for not only the initiative, but also for just like the dogged determination, the professionalism, and you know, just the real like stick to it. She really stuck to it in a way that most people wouldn't have. So I appreciate you, Janine, and I look forward to hearing this presentation again right now.
Great, thanks, Hans. All right, let me just share my screen here. Okay, great. Well, thank you, Hans, for that introduction. I appreciate it. Again, my name is Janine. I'm the policy analyst. Took on this project. I was the lead on this project. The report itself is very long, as we've sort of mentioned already. So there's no way I can really cover everything in that report here this evening. But I'm going to go through some sort of key takeaways and some main themes of the report here. I want to make sure we have time to go through some questions and comments. So if you have any questions about the report, about the presentation, about the Plainview project in general, you can send them via the chat to Danny, and he'll just keep an eye on those and make sure that they get asked when we get to the end of the presentation. So I want to just give a sort of refresher on what the Plainview project was for anyone who's not familiar with it or needs sort of a reminder. So the Plainview project began when a team of attorneys in Philadelphia found some public Facebook pages created by police officers, and those pages appeared to endorse violence, racism, and bigotry. So they requested rosters from 7 police departments around the country, and then used those rosters to search for public Facebook pages where officers identified their profession in some way on the profile. And then they captured any posts or comments that they felt could erode civilian trust and confidence in police. So they put those all together and released them on the Plainview Project website on June 1st of 2019. So the presentation tonight isn't really a review of the actual content of the database. I cover that a lot in the report. I go into a lot of the themes that are present and why those themes are so significant and how detrimental some of the content is to policing in Philadelphia. Tonight, I'm really going to focus on a review of the department's response to this scandal and some of their processes that they had in place and how the PAC was or was not empowered to fulfill some of our oversight duties. So this is kind of a small sampling of some of the media coverage that took place in the days and weeks following the release of this database. And just from this sampling, you can see that there was a lot of emotion, a lot of outrage, community groups and faith groups. People were really upset when this was released. And this emotion from the residents of Philadelphia was one of the main reasons why the PAC wanted to get involved here and become a part of the review process and shedding light on some of this that was happening behind the scenes within the department. Ultimately, however, the PAC was not included in the city or the police department's response to the database. Our executive order that governs how our office functions outlines our duties, and those include identifying and resolving systemic concerns and translating complex policies. So in order to fulfill these duties and to be responsive to the concerns of residents, we wanted to make sure that we were paying close attention here. We also wanted to make sure that someone outside of the police department and outside of a law enforcement perspective thoroughly reviewed every PPD contribution to the database, as well as the finer points and the details of the discipline process that was being used here. So I thought it would be helpful to include a brief timeline here to sort of walk us through this scandal and everything that happened after it. On June 1st, 2019, the database was released to the public, and ideally, the PAC would have been brought in at this point to serve as this oversight body. Other cities that were implicated in the database sort of took this approach. So Dallas, Texas was included in the database, and shortly after it was released, a city council member there suggested that the oversight body be brought into this sort of integrated review in the interest of unbiased investigations and checks and balances. And the police chief there agreed with that. So that was the path that the PAC was hoping for. So shortly after this database goes public, the department starts to issue some discipline for some of the most egregious officers. So 15 officers were dismissed and 9 officers received 30-day suspension. So those were the most egregious officers with the highest number of posts and comments included. So that discipline is starting to happen. And at the same time, the PAC is submitting requests for information. So more informal requests for information, trying to sort of get a seat at the table as this review is beginning to occur. By September 5th, 2019, we haven't really heard a lot. We haven't gotten a lot of information. So we send a formal written request for information and documents to the police department. And a few days later, it's interesting to note that there was a public city council hearing about the Plainview project. And it was at that hearing that the PAC first learned about the discipline criteria for the officers involved in the database. So we didn't know anything really until this hearing took place in September. Now, I want to just briefly review exactly what was happening behind the scenes at the police department at this time. So everything really started with internal affairs investigations. So the officers who were named in the database were subjected to these investigations at internal affairs, where investigators were reviewing all of their Plainview project content. And they were reviewing to see if the officers had violated the social media directive issued by the police department in 2011 and updated in 2012. So the investigators were looking through the content to see, did they include any ethnic slurs, profanity, personal insults, all the things listed out here in the directive. And also anything that would violate the city's policy about sexual harassment. So that's what the internal affairs investigators are looking for in their investigations. At the same time as those investigations are occurring, there's an outside analysis that's also taking place. So officers have a right to free speech just as anyone else does, but there are some special considerations for government employees. So that made it necessary for a legal team to review all of the database content and determine whether the speech was protected by the First Amendment. So essentially, this law firm is deciding if the police department can discipline these officers, but it's not telling the department that they should discipline them. They're more of an advising on the legal issues that are involved here. So once these two analyses are completed, all of that information is then forwarded to the charging unit at the police department. So the charging unit is an administrative unit that's responsible for applying pieces of the disciplinary code to officers and giving them discipline charges that they can plead guilty or not guilty to, or they can go to a hearing at the police board of inquiry. So the charging unit has to compare all of this information from internal affairs with all the information from the law firm and sort of make sense of that and come up with the charges. So once all of that occurs, all of the analysis is done, the charges are applied, then the timeline continues. So in October of 2019, there were 7 disciplinary hearings for officers, and those hearings all resulted in not guilty findings. As a result of that, all of the charges were rewritten and sort of redone to help the department have a stronger case at future hearings. And then in February 2019, the PAC finally received some detailed information that we had requested. So we received a couple of spreadsheets that included internal affairs findings, as well as what discipline had been given out to date. But those spreadsheets, while they were helpful and great to receive, they raised more questions, and we just continued to advocate for more access at that point to answer our questions and really understand what exactly was happening at the police department with these officers. So by the time we get to late summer of 2020, a year has gone by since the database was released, and we decided it's time to do a report. Enough time had passed and we had some information, so we wanted to at least begin to explain all of this to the residents who had expressed so much outrage previously. So we sent our report in August, and about a week later, the police department delivered a lot of the documents that we had requested. So it took just about a year from our first formal request to when we received most of the crucial information that really could have been used to do a full review of everything that had happened. And it's important to note here, there is some context as to why the police department was not sharing all of this information openly with the PAC. The police department has stated that they were concerned about compromising their ability to defend these dismissals and other discipline down the line at arbitration, or if there's any litigation in the future. So they wanted to protect their decisions and keep the integrity of their decisions. But the PAC does disagree with this. We do believe that there were solutions that could have been in place to prioritize oversight, allow us to have access to all of this information, while also protecting the discipline decisions made by the department. So as we did our full review, there were really 2 main areas of concern that we focused on in the report. So the first main area was the processes that were used, the technical aspects of the PPD response. So a point we make a lot in the report is that the processes and decisions related to the scandal lacked transparency. As I already noted, it took months for us to even get a response to our initial request, and then additional months to receive the information that we needed in order to fulfill our duties. These processes like the investigations and charging all happened with no oversight. So any concerns about accuracy or data cohesion could not be addressed while there was still time to remedy them. The initial dismissals and suspensions that took place right after the database was released were a good step. It showed that the department was taking this very seriously and was ready to take swift action in response to these really egregious officers. But the PAC was concerned about everything that was going to happen next. So we know that the guy who posts 70 times and posts this vile content, this Islamophobic content, we know he's probably going to get fired. But what about everyone else, all of the rest of the officers in this PAC of 300 current officers? That's what we wanted to pay attention to, because if the details of those processes are, if they're thorough and they're fair, then we know that, it's going to be less likely an officer can get to that arbitration and then get their job back. So it all comes back to where accountability begins in the disciplinary process. And that's why one reason why oversight exists, to pay close attention to these details to make sure that everything is happening in a thorough and fair way. Another point of concern was that the chief inspector who was assigned to make all of the charging decisions for the Plainview project officers had full discretion over the charges. He kind of came up with his own system about how he would apply charges from the disciplinary code. So he was doing that all on his own, while also still being responsible for his regular job duties in his regular post. So that's a lot of information for one person to go through. It's very labor intensive. There were pages and pages of legal guidance and pages of internal affairs investigations. So we thought that was a little bit, that was a lot for one person to try to take on. And lastly, PAC believes that based on legal precedents and the disciplinary code, that more officers could have received more serious discipline than they did. I noted earlier that the internal affairs investigations focused on whether or not officers violated the social media directive. And by focusing so intently on that specific directive, we think it kind of missed the point of the harm and the impact of this content. There's other sections in the disciplinary code that relate more to conduct unbecoming an officer. And we think that those more serious charges would have been more appropriate and could have been applied based on what we know about legal precedents and such. And the second area of concern that we focus on, and we go into much more detail in the report, relates to the content of the actual posts and comments and how that content relates to policing culture. So policing culture has come up a lot in the last few months in the wake of the protests that happened this summer, in the wake of the murder of George Floyd. And that's one of the reasons why this scandal and the response to it is so relevant today. So I have on the left this word cloud that shows all the different themes that we found in the database. And then the size of the font corresponds to the frequency that that theme appeared in the database. So the most common theme was Islamophobia, and followed by an officer making light of use of force, using coded racist language, et cetera. You can see it here on the word cloud. So we talk a lot about culture in the report because culture is why these themes matter. So we know that police culture has been studied a lot by academics, and they've highlighted some negative aspects of policing culture, such as isolation, hypermasculinity, the blue wall of silence, and all of those were present in the content within the database. And every workplace has a culture. Policing is no different, but the important thing about culture is how pervasive it is. So all aspects of beliefs and assumptions about policing that are present in a department's culture impact an officer's decisions and behaviors. So that's why, while it's important to hold individual officers accountable, it's really not enough to fix the harms that were done here. So a more holistic review is needed to sort of get to the root cause and some of the things that are underlying these posts. And I have an example here because it was one of the more startling things that we came across while working on this project. There was an indication from leadership in the police department that they thought that the Plainview project was just a politically motivated hit job in a sense, or a way to ostracize officers who have conservative political views. And that was troubling because it sort of signaled this lack of understanding of the wrongdoing or lack of a recognition of the harm that was really caused by all this content. So we made a series of recommendations to the police department in our report, and I want to go through them briefly. We got the response from the police department to our recommendations last week. And so those are detailed, they're included with our report, and I just want to sort of touch on these before we get to questions. Our first recommendation relates to culture, which I was just speaking about. We recommended that the police department engage an outside body to conduct a review of the culture at the PPD with a special focus on racism and sexism. And the PPD was responsive to this recommendation. They agreed about the importance of this topic, but noted that funding is limited and they're kind of pulled in a lot of directions with their budget. So they're responsive to this, but unclear on how this could be funded. Recommendation 2 was speaking to our struggles to have access to the information we needed to do this project and to fulfill our oversight duties. We recommended that the police department grant full and timely access to documents, information, and personnel as requested, with confidentiality agreements in place as needed. And then recommendation 2A relates to internal complaints within the police department. So this entire investigation, everything related to the Plainview project, was classified as an internal investigation because it did not originate from a complaint by a citizen. So internal investigations are confidential, they're kept away from public review. And we are recommending here, as we have in the past, that the police department creates a clear policy on how investigations are deemed to be internals and creating an appeal process for this classification. So the police department accepted both of these recommendations, although they disagreed with our characterization of our lack of access, but agreed on the importance of following the executive order. And they agreed on our recommendation relating to internals. Recommendation 3 and 3A and 3B relate to the charging process. So we recommended that the department decentralize charging decisions. And as I mentioned previously, the chief inspector doing the charging had a lot of work for one person, a very labor-intensive job to go through all of this. And so we were recommending that oversight on this type of process could be quality control, essentially checking for consistency and accuracy in real time. Recommendation 3A was about a recusal policy, just to make sure that anyone working in the charging unit would recuse themselves from making decisions about officers that they know or that they have relationships with. And recommendation 3B recommended that the department formally document internal investigative guidance and metrics and decision-making when it comes to large-scale events like this, and working under the assumption that these scandals, these sensitive sort of occurrences are going to be reviewed either externally or internally, and preserving this would just make after action reviews more effective. The police department rejected our recommendation about decentralizing charging. They abstained from commenting on the recusal policy recommendation because we're working on a collaborative report with them about reforming the charging process and the disciplinary hearing process. So they're holding off on that until we can work on that project. And they rejected our recommendation about formally documenting events of this nature in addition to what they already do. Recommendation 4 and 4A relate to the reconciliation process, which is a formal process by which a government or a governmental body will acknowledge any harms that they've caused and then work to move past that with community members through this formal process. We recommended that the Plainview projects be folded into any reconciliation efforts that occur to acknowledge the anguish that was expressed by communities after the database was released, And we recommended that the police department create a section on their website that publicizes their participation in any reconciliation efforts and invites public input. So the department accepted these. They acknowledged that they're already participating in some reconciliation efforts that are occurring citywide, but didn't really touch on how the Plainview project would be worked into that. And they accepted the website recommendation as well. Recommendation 5 is about data, just noting that there's a wealth of data available within the Plainview project database, and we recommended the department use it for training efforts, especially around cultural competency, considering that Islamophobia was so present in the content. And the police department agreed with that and accepted this recommendation. And finally, recommendation 6 suggests that the police department incorporate social media and lessons from the Plainview project database into new officer wellness initiatives, including the new active bystandership training that has been promoted. And the police department accepted and agreed with this recommendation as well. So in conclusion, we know that monumental events have occurred since the database was released in June 2019, but as I said earlier, the database and the police department's response to it are just as relevant now. And it's because this scandal embodies several concerns that have been expressed in conversations about reform, such as the need for increased accountability in investigations and in disciplinary procedures, as well as just reforming police culture in general. So in that sense, this database and the scandal shows a clear path towards some specific areas where reform can begin in Philadelphia. And I wanted to end by plugging not only voting on the ballot question, as Rhonda mentioned earlier in the meeting, but also a listening session that's happening with City Council on this coming Monday from 4:30 to 6:30. They're going to talk about the ballot question, about the Oversight Commission, and also are welcoming input and suggestions for what the new commission should look like and what their power should be. So I really recommend people tune into that. I didn't put any access information on here, but I'm sure we can put that in the chat or figure out how people can access.
Yeah, we'll put it in the chat. So thank you, Janine. That was even better the second time. So I appreciate that presentation. And so I think for me, you know, while Janine tried to take a 40-page report and make it into 20 minutes, I want to take that and make it into like 1 minute, because there's a basic idea here that police officers, you know, who are the people that we empower as residents of the city to take away life and liberty, were publicly celebrating extrajudicial violence, making racist comments, making sexist comments, and making bigoted comments. Given the events of the last year and the events of including the protests after the murder of George Floyd, it's important to note that they also made many comments that included violence against protesters. And so that was an interesting bellwether that occurred a year before any of the violence that we saw against protesters about a year later. But despite that, the entity that's charged with review of the police was actively blocked from doing so for almost a year. Now, I understand, as Janine mentioned, that the Police Advisory Commission was blocked from fulfilling its mandate because the police department and their attorneys in the law department felt that a PAC's access would undermine or potentially damage the discipline that was meted out and could influence future lawsuits and could influence arbitration. The PAC obviously respects that as a priority, but doesn't really believe that oversight should suffer in the face of these ideas. In fact, there are paths forward that the PAC was only able to advise that after taking really aggressive action to encourage these entities to find other paths to providing oversight while also attempting to protect these processes. And so I really feel like that's a lesson learned that Philadelphia needs to make sure that we don't forget. And I think nothing highlights that further than understanding that it's actually the police department that was a threat to discipline. As we noted here, there were 7 PBI hearings lost because the police department was so insular that they didn't seek outside input and made a series of really catastrophic errors in the early stages of this. That can't be lost as we defend the idea that oversight is the threat to discipline, when it was actually the lack of oversight, either from another entity that wasn't the PAC or from the PAC that created 7 officers that even the police department believed needed to be disciplined from escaping that and forever escaping that at this point. We can't lose sight of the fact that it means something when memos drafted by law firms are inadvertently disclosed to people. I'm not going to draw a conclusion here, but I know many people have about what this means, that attorney-client privilege was just found its way into the hands of their opponents, and that no one was disciplined for it. We can't lose sight of the fact that the charges that focus wholly on social media do speak to an idea and culture about how seriously the police department took this. And finally, I'll say that the idea that internals, the idea that I'm leaving the city and that internals, the issue that I have been talking about for 3 years, are still a thing, is troubling. Commissioner Ross understood this on some level, but was well overdue in changing that process. And Commissioner Outlaw has been here since February and has been aware of this since February and is overdue in changing that process. I'm happy to hear that it's being considered, but in my opinion, that is a problem, that a structural problem that needs to be overcome in terms of transparency. There cannot be a shadow or a secret way of handling discipline in the city when it isn't necessary to be done. I'm not going to say everything has to be open to everybody, but there does need to be some transparency. So that's my major takeaways from this report and this presentation that Janine presented. Again, I can't thank Janine enough, but I do want to open it up to questions if we have any already, Danny.
I sent one over to Janine that was really simple.
Okay.
Oh, sorry.
Janine, while you're responding to that, I want to also, on behalf of the commissioners, thank you for your thorough job. It's been a long slog through all of that, and we're grateful for your meticulous attention to detail on the report. And I want to underscore one thing that Hans said, that if some of the investigation was delayed because of conversations between the police department and their lawyers, while we are sensitive to that, in the end, that's not the PAC's charge. It wouldn't be any different from any other entities saying, well, I can't do this because I'm taking advice from my lawyers. Our charge is to look to the police department and not to mediate disagreements perhaps, or give guidance on whether they should follow their lawyer's advice. So I just wanted to add that point as well. And so Janine, I will pass it back to you to answer the question.
Sure. So it looks like it was a 2-part question. So one part was the chief inspector on the Plainview project list? So the chief inspector, who is normally in charge of the charging unit and making these charging decisions, was on the Plainview project list. And so he was removed from his responsibilities for the Plainview project. So the police department called in a different chief inspector from a different unit who had previously held this position in the charging unit to make these decisions instead of the regular chief inspector. So I think that answers the question. But I think Marta asked it, so if that doesn't cover it, please let us know.
So Janine, not to split hairs, but I just want to make sure that we're precise here. The person normally in charge of charging is an inspector, and they brought in a chief inspector, which is a next rank, or maybe above that. Small but important distinction.
All right, sorry.
Are there any other questions?
I don't have any in the chat. If anybody wants to raise their hand through the Zoom feature or send questions to the chat. Oh, looks like Bilal has a question.
It does.
You're unmuted, Bilal.
mine is more a statement. First of all, you did an excellent job. And that I think that since it's going to be a listening session with City Council on Monday, we should make sure that whoever's participating in that session from City Council, that they have the report and that they read it. And I know that might be a big demand, but because I think you detailed a lot of recommendations that are still up in the air. And council needs to know that, like what Hans has said in his presentation, what they're not doing and still not doing. I think that using the report as a foundation, at least have a discussion with council, so when they do have the listening sessions, they can know pretty well in detail some of the troubles we have had over the last couple of years getting information from the police.
It looks like Council Member Gim is actually here and has raised her hand. So I'm asked Council Member Gim to unmute you.
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much.
Well,
First of all, I also want to just express my gratitude to the investigative team and to the PAC. I also want to say thank you to Hans for your leadership on this issue as well, and on your service to the Police Advisory Commission. We're going to do our best to make sure that we follow up. I also want to share that tomorrow we'll be having a follow-up to our public hearings on the police use of force around the 676 and 52nd Street actions that followed the George Floyd protests. Those are going to be starting tomorrow at 9:30 in the morning. We will be bringing in, the commissioner and the managing director to address some of these issues, some of which are going to be expressed. I think this will be an ongoing dialogue, though, and it'll be important for us to follow up. My question, though, for the investigator is, as I think Hans alluded to this already, but, there were a significant number of comments and statements said about use of force. There were references to protesters, and there was clearly an action, what we would say like 8-9 months later, that involved some pretty shocking circumstances, much of which was caught on video. And so I'm curious about whether, as the Police Advisory Commission continues to do its work, whether it's going to draw links between any behaviors that existed between the Plainview Project and actions that might have been taken either by individual police officers or others, in the 9 months afterwards.
I mean, I can do my best to sort of answer from my perspective, but I think certainly we hope to continue paying attention. I think one of the recommendations mentions sort of the wealth of data in the database. So being able to reference that in the future, I think will be very useful. And in projects that we're working on now and that will be coming up, the projects are much more data intensive. And so we'll be able to have access to data in a different way and access to analysis of that data. So I'm hoping that we're able to continue to make connections between the Plainview Project and current events and future events. But I don't know, Hans, I'm not sure if there's something else you want to add here.
No, I think you nailed it. I think that the one thing that you probably left out is that one of the things that Janine is now able to do is that you give her, it's almost like a magic trick. If you give her a police officer's name, she can pretty much tell you in a few minutes if they're in the Plainview Project. And so we don't solely rely on that. There's also a database that's been created that by Janine that is searchable. So if there is something that occurs, we can understand if that officer was implicated in this Plainview Project, and look at their actual posts by looking through a single database or spreadsheet that was created. So that is certainly possible, and on some level, it's anecdotally happening that we hear about an officer's misconduct or alleged misconduct and are able to understand who they are with more context because of this project.
I believe Samantha Williams wanted to chat. She is helping with the organizing the listening session. Samantha, I'm gonna unmute you.
Hi, everyone. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Samantha Williams. I'm the Director of Legislation and Policy for Councilman Curtis Jones. And since the listening session was brought up in Janine's presentation, I just wanted to let everyone know that I am the person that is coordinating the listening session for Philadelphia City Council. It is going to be in our special committee on criminal justice reform. So as a part of that committee, it's council members and other people who are involved in criminal justice related projects within the city. It's going to be on Monday, next Monday from 4:30 to 6:30. And we do encourage everyone to participate and let us know what they would like to see from any new independent commission if that is approved on the November 3rd election. So people who are interested in signing up can email me at samantha.williams@phila.gov by this Friday, by close of business this Friday, and I'll be keeping a tab of everyone who emails me. This is a virtual hearing that's going to be conducted by Microsoft Teams, so we are asking people to indicate when they sign up if they have the capability to use Microsoft Teams. If they do not, we will still be able to connect them through telephone to the hearing. But we just want to know which people we are going to be sending out login information for, and then which people we are going to be calling in ourselves. So we're excited for the hearing, and we are going to also be streaming that on our on channel 64 on Xfinity, on channel 40 on FiOS, and then on our website at phlcouncil.com/watch-city-council. If you are signing up to participate, we would also ask that even though the hearing starts at 4:30, since it's a virtual hearing, we like to have people log in early and do mic checks with our tech team so we know that once we go live, everybody is connected and able to be heard. So if you are planning to participate, we'd ask that you log in by 4:15 p.m. once you receive the login information. Thank you. And Hans, I just want to say thank you so much for all the work that you've done. Is very much appreciated by City Council at large, but also personally in general. Those of you who don't know, even though I am a lawyer and a City Council staffer, I too had to file a complaint against police, and Hans and the PAC were so very helpful with that entire process, because it was even difficult for me as a lawyer to navigate that process. And so I'm very thankful for everything you have helped me with, and I wish you luck in your new opportunity, and I'm happy for you. And glad you're not leaving the city in general, just, you know, the city as the job.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Danny, I think Rob Roy had his hand up. I'm sorry.
He actually sent me a question that I sent to Janine.
Perfect.
Yes.
Okay. I should have known you were on it.
Just looking at it. So this question relates to a scandal that was in 2009 regarding Philly police staff posting racist and sexist commentary on the Dome Lights website, which was like a chat site, like a forum, I guess. The commissioner and the mayor at the time promised reform. The 10 years that followed involved Dome Lights transferring to Twitter and being followed by several PPD accounts. If PPD lacks the institutional memory to learn from mistakes in engagement from that 2009 scandal to avoid the 2019 Plainview project scandal, how can we have faith that we won't be back in another scandal in 2029? I think it's a really great question and a really good point. I'm hoping that the existence of the PAC as it is today, as well as a future oversight commission, if it gets approved, I'm hoping that that helps prevent this from happening again. Just the amount of work that went into reviewing all of the Plainview project information and the advocating that the PAC had to do for access to really do this thorough review, I'm hoping that that helps move the needle and change how oversight can be done when something like this does happen. The ultimate goal when we're working on a project like this is to prevent something like this from happening in the future and guiding how a responsible look for future events. So I'm hoping that this work can help prevent something like this from happening in the future. But as far as the department learning from this, I feel like we did our best to help them on that journey with this report.
Yeah, and I think so this is an insightful point. I think one of the points that it brings up is that a lot of the response here suggested that this was an unprecedented event, and clearly it wasn't. It happened before, but the honest answer that I could offer here is that there's nothing we can do to make sure that this doesn't happen again. This being that police officers express bigoted or problematic views. What we can, I think, really work towards is ensuring that that is measured, that there is an appropriate and swift response to it, that officers don't feel safe in a place that in a workplace that they can do this, and they sure can't do it publicly. Those are all things I think are attainable. I don't know that we're going to be able to help to stop people from thinking and feeling a certain way, but we can sure make sure that they understand that it's not acceptable. And to me, the idea that these public posts existed, and one thing that we haven't talked about is that we can reasonably assume that, like the rest of us, they had connections to their coworkers, and that they weren't called out. I think Janine referenced this in the ABLE training. Tells me that they felt pretty safe doing it. And that's a problem. So that's one thing I'd like to see not happen, and not just here in Philadelphia, but around the country, where the people who hold these views and who feel that they need to express these views are not police officers. But thanks for the question, Rob.
Gail had her hand raised next. I just unmuted you, Gail, if you wanted to ask your question. And then Janine, there is another question in the chat.
Thank you. And thank you, Janine, for such a thorough report. And it is obvious how much work it took. And thank you, Hans, for everything. You've always provided Power Live Free with access and education and help when we asked you for it. So help in understanding what was going on with the police department. I have two questions. I'll try to ask the first one in a clear way. I saw in the report that one of the things the police department said was the reason for not providing information was that one person didn't make the complaint. One individual didn't make the complaint. So how would a complaint against a broad topic, like excessive use of force, or like anything that was a cultural aspect of things, a negative cultural thing, would it have to start with an individual complaint? Or what's the block? Would it be some kind of police directive that would have to change? And how would, where's the access point there in terms of allowing that to happen? Is that clear? Or
so, what you're describing is the idea that the police department can, when they do not receive, if I'm hearing you correctly, so I'm going to try and summarize the question. If I'm wrong, please let me know. That okay. If the police department receives a complaint that is not a complaint against police, known as a CAP, then they are permitted to open what they're calling an internal investigation. Those are two different paths, and all of that, as you rightly stated, hinges on how they become aware of a problem. If it is a complaint filed by a resident, or if they find it on social media, or they see it on the news, or they get an anonymous email, etc., then they can create an internal. You also reference how does this play into broad issues? If they want to investigate broad problems that encompass many officers. I do think that you're touching on two really important topics here. One is that and as we've recommended in the past, internals should be created when they need to be created, not because they can be created. So if there is a need that can be articulated, someone will be harmed, something else will be threatened, whether it's the integrity of an investigation, something else, but an articulated need, then that is when an internal should be created, and not just because of something as arbitrary about the way the complaint was learned about. That has always been very strange and I think inconsistent with the ideals of transparency. But to your other point, this idea of these larger systemic issues, I'll say that I think that those are internals, to your point, or they would be or could be internals. And the other issue for us there is that I believe that the next PAC needs to retain a review of large-scale policy practice issues and not wholly be focused on only complaints against police or individual incidents of misconduct. I'm not suggesting that that isn't important, but I do believe that based on what you just said, as you just rightfully focused on, that's equally important, if not sometimes more important. And so we need to make sure that both of these goals are accomplished, and that can only really be done with a fully resourced, I guess we're calling it Citizens Police Oversight Commission, to meet the needs of the residents who want frontline investigation, but also the needs of advocacy groups like your own that want larger scale reviews of police practice. So Gail, I apologize. I failed to pause and say, did I get it right? So did I actually answer the question that you wanted me to answer?
Yes, yeah, thank you. I appreciate that.
Thank you.
There was another question.
Is that George? I think he has a question. I'm sorry, go ahead, Jeannie.
There was another question in the chat that I just wanted to touch on. The question was, does PAC have specific recommendations regarding the reconciliation process? And the question references community members' deep feelings of anger, pain, fear, distrust, etc. So we didn't make any specific recommendations around reconciliation. We recommended that the Plainview project be included in the reconciliation. And I think we kept it sort of broad at this stage because reconciliation, we know, is this big project that's ongoing with the police department and various other entities in the city. So we kind of wanted to just remind in this recommendation that the Plainview project happened and should be included in this reconciliation process, but we didn't really touch on any specifics of what we think the process should look like. And the process does have some pretty formal, guidelines for how it should be done anyways.
Right. And I think that what Janine pulled out in terms of reconciliation was a fairly prescribed process by the National Network for Safe Communities, right? So you brought out the idea, John Jay College of Criminal Justice has been engaging in this process with police departments around the country to focus specifically on police reconciliation. So I do respect the city's reconciliation goals, but I do think that it is a worthy conversation to recognize how much of that goal, how much of that reconciliation process actually is focused on or encompasses police. It's not all of them, but as a large department with the biggest budget, it'd be impossible for them not to have a lot of reconciling to do or a lot of atonement to do with the residents of the city.
Did George have a question?
You're unmuted. Oh.
I think he is saying no.
Okay.
Oh. He was making like gestures.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so are there any other questions from the audience?
Nothing else in the chat, and I don't see any other hands raised. If anybody else has questions.
Well, Rhonda, are we in the public comment period?
We are absolutely in the public comment. So once again, we want to thank Janine for her fine work on that, and now open it up to folks on any comment on any topic. And that's, kind of a broad range, hon. So I hope you're ready to start catching.
Thanks, Rhonda.
Don't see any hand raised or anything in chat. Did you want to talk at all more about the ballot question, Hans?
I can, and I guess now I have to, right, Dan? As everyone may have heard from the conversation this evening, the city of Philadelphia is looking to implement a ballot question, number 3, I believe, on whether or not they should create a Citizens Police Oversight Commission. Now, the details haven't been very specific, but what we do know is that the city council is looking to provide an organization that is, one, embedded in the city charter, which means that it is not existing wholly by executive order as we do now, which means that we cannot easily be removed from city government. The next mayor, this mayor I believe would never do that, but the next mayor could decide that no PAC is necessary, and with a stroke of a pen remove us. This would safeguard us from that and further give the PAC more independence. In addition to that, my understanding is that City Council broadly wants a body that does engage in frontline investigations. On some level, is able to take complaints and investigate those complaints to bring them forward. Those are 2 areas of oversight that the PAC has not really been able to meet. In other words, our full independence away from the city government, and also our ability to investigate complaints. That is what City Council is broadly trying to repair. And I believe other powers and responsibilities and composition are still up for debate and discussion, and even what cases the PAC investigates are still going to be discussed. So I definitely encourage everybody to consider supporting, I think I could say that, what they believe is right on ballot 3, and attending the listening session to offer your feedback to City Council on Monday afternoon. That information is in the chat, and you can email Samantha Williams if you want to participate.
Great. Any questions?
No more questions, no more hands raised. Oh, Sylvia has a question.
Sylvia, you should be unmuted now.
Maybe this is a really dumb question, but is the police department, Philly Police Department, working hard to defeat this ballot question?
I actually have heard quite the opposite. I've heard Commissioner Outlaw and the mayor express support for a Citizens Police Oversight Commission. So no, I don't believe that. And I also have not seen personally or heard personally of any FOP blocking it. However, I think we can assume that if it is passed, there would be a response from the FOP. And I base that on the fact that they have responded to Council Member Gilmore Richardson's bill on basic transparency in the contracting process, which I don't believe bodes well for their belief that transparency should exist in the investigatory process.
Thank you.
Looks like Deputy Commissioner Wimberly might want to talk, so I am unmuting. Deputy Commissioner Wimberly, I'm unmuted you.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Hans.
How are you?
I'm cool. How you doing?
Great.
Good. In reference to the last question, if the police department is fighting anything regarding that, Commissioner Outlaw's stance is for transparency, and that's what we're trying to do. Of course, as you've explained through the Plainview project, that there have been some bumps in the road, but our direction is towards more transparency and including the public. Okay.
Thank you, Deputy Commissioner Wimberly. And we remember that when Commissioner Outlaw came to Philadelphia, among the first things that she talked about was the importance of transparency and oversight.
This might be more of a question for either Council Member Gim or Samantha, but someone asked, why wasn't the listening session held prior to the start of voting?
I do want to highlight that the entire concept of a new PAC was not being discussed before the protest of George Floyd. So a lot of this materialized very, very quickly, and that should be highlighted. I can't answer for council about when they schedule things, but I will say that this all materialized very late.
It actually doesn't look like Samantha's here. I don't know if Councilmember Kim wants to. Doesn't look like they're. Sorry, we don't. Doesn't look like I can unmute.
Okay. Well, I will take this opportunity to thank everyone again. As I mentioned already, coming here was a big deal. It was a big learning curve for me, understanding what was happening in Philadelphia, learning a new city and a new landscape, meeting 13 new commissioners and a staff was all very challenging. And I got a great deal of support from all of those folks and from many of the people on this call, many of the organizations that helped get me up to speed and supported me directly and indirectly over the last 3 years. And I could not have been successful without those folks. And honestly, that does include many police officers, many police leadership. Now, I may be hard on them, but there was a lot of partnership that I found there as well. So I look forward to continuing, communicating with everyone here and making sure that we can work together on wherever possible. And I really do appreciate the level of support that I got from so many different people who did not need to support me, but really did. So thank you all very much.
Before we take a motion to adjourn, consistent with our rules, I want to ask folks to join me in applauding you, Hans. We know that you are staying in Philadelphia, and we are confident that whatever you do on the national stage will end up benefiting Philadelphia. So we thank you for your continued commitment. And now we request, do I have a motion to adjourn the meeting from the commissioners?
Yeah, looks like Ben.
Ben, thank you. Do we have a second? Mujib second. All in favor of the commissioners? You can't vote twice, George. That's not a fight. All right, I believe that looks like a unanimous motion. I want to thank you all for joining us. Next month's meeting will be a whole new ball game post-election. So stay tuned. But for now, take care and stay safe.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Thank you everyone for coming.